Welcome, low ego action heroes. I'm Debbie Levitt from Delta CX. We are a full service CX and UX consultancy. And this is my Axure 10 Core Skills course. I've been using Axure since February 2011, and I've been teaching it for many, many years. And in fact, I've been one of Axure's recommended trainers since 2014. This course is designed to take you from super Axure newbie or Axure afraid all the way through to confident intermediate. So if you've landed on this one video, there are many, many others. Please check our Axure lessons playlist for a lot more videos about using Axure. The Delta CX YouTube channel has over 500 videos on it as of when I'm recording this in December 2021, and I hope you'll subscribe and join in some of our live streams. I'm live usually 3 or 4 times a week with teaching UX research and design, talking about CX, helping people get into the profession, helping leaders and managers, and of course, don't forget Tuesday, office hours, Ask Me Anything. So subscribe and hang out here. So thanks for being here. Please subscribe and let's jump into that next Axure lesson.
Let's get to know medium fidelity form widgets in Axure. These live in the library, the default library, and you will see forms, text field, text area, drop list, list box, checkbox, and radio button. Let's get to know all of them. Let's start with the text field. Now, I'm calling these medium fidelity because by default, they look kind of plain. They're not super designed. They're just kind of boxy. You can resize them, but in a later lesson, I'll show you how to really do some further visual design on these types of form fields so you can better control the look of your stuff. But if you're just whipping up some medium fidelity wireframes or prototypes, this is probably good enough. So this is a form field. Now, a common newbie mistake in Axure is when you need an area for someone to type into, like a form field, people bring out a box. They think, oh, okay, I'll just show a box and that will represent a form field. But the problem is that a box cannot be typed into. So if I were to open this in my preview, I would see they both look kind of the same, but one of them I can click and type into, and one of them I cannot click or type into. So I do see that mistake a lot. Make sure if you need somebody to click and type into things or tab and type into things, you are using the text field. So that's text field. Now there's a few more things to know about the text field before we move on. One is that if you select it and you come over here to interactions and then your properties, make sure you've got show all opened up. There's a lot of stuff going on here. Let's get to know it. By default, Axure tries to give you a disabled style. It's called form disabled. We'll look at our global styles in a moment. And as for the hint style, Axure gives you a default style called form hint. And so we can change our default styles by going to our widget style manager. And we will see we now have text field, form disabled, and form hint. They're nowhere near each other. I don't know why, but that's where they are. And so if we want to make changes, that's where we would need to make changes. So let's imagine that our text field, when people type in it, it's going to be huge, just for fun. It's going to be black text and it's going to be 18. When the form is disabled, it's just filled with gray, but it says there's no line around it. Let's give it a little bit of a line. And then when it's a form hint, which I'll explain in a moment, we could say the font color is gray, the font size is 15, and it is italicized. Let me show you how these three, which are already assigned, so notice that we already have assigned text field by default, and then we've got the disabled style and the hint style. That's an extra style that you will see for text fields and some of these form fields. So let's take a look. Let's refresh. So when I click in here, this is now focus. So it's something for you to get to know. This is focus. This is lost focus. I've clicked out of the field. If I click in the field, we have focus in the field. If I tab away, we have lost focus. So that's going to come into play later. Make sure you get it now. So when I type something in here, there is my black 18-point font. So that is what we had for the default text field. Now, for our hint text, now we wouldn't see disabled unless we told Axure it was disabled. So let's tell it it's disabled. Let's go back and refresh that. There is our disabled field, and notice not only does it have the visual design we assigned disabled, but I am clicking in this, I'm rage clicking in this, and it does not work. So remember, disabling gives it the visual style that you told Axure from the style effects, but it also keeps something from functioning. So I'm going to uncheck that. Now let's talk about hints. Let's say that our hint for this field is first name. But remember that for accessibility, we want to make sure that we're using field labels. It's still better to use field labels than just hint text alone. Now let's see what that looks like. Refresh. There it is. And if I click in it and I start typing, it goes away. If I delete that, it comes back. Now we have a little setting there that says, do you want the hint text to hide because people are typing, or on focus? Now typically you want to choose typing, and that is the default, because if you have the hint go away when people focus, sometimes people forget what you wanted in that field, and then they have to click away from the field to see the hint text. So you probably don't want the hint text to go away until they are typing. I don't use the tooltip or the submit button. You can play around with that, but I'd probably rather build these things manually, but that's just me. If your text field was going to have a maximum length, you could put that here, but I'm hoping our databases are now flexible enough where we can allow long characters, long names, long addresses in these text fields. So that's a little bit about disabled, hint style, and the hint settings. Let's also talk quickly about this input type. So for the most part, you're going to want your text fields to be text. No surprise there. But you do have other choices. Let's talk about what those choices look like. The second most common one that I use is password. Let's take a look at what password looks like by refreshing. Now, of course, it still says first name, but let's pretend this said enter your password, or it said nothing. As I type things, we have those dots, those typical password things. And that way you can do a realistic password entry without people seeing it. Now, this isn't encrypted. Axure can still tell you what they've typed in there. So remember, that information is not private or encrypted in any way. This is a prototype. It is pretending that your password is not visible, but there is no real encryption there. So just heads up there. What else was I going to tell you? Oh yeah, these other input types. So the interesting thing about these other input types is that they do not validate. So for example, if I type email here and I come back here and I come back here and I have an email field and I just write Debbie in it, and then I click away, there's no error message. So people used to think that those different types meant that Axure was going to validate that it was whatever it said. Oh, it's an email, it's going to validate that it's an email. It's definitely not, because I just wrote a non-email and Axure didn't care. What this actually does, and I encourage you to experiment with it on your own time, is it will change the mobile keyboard that comes up when people enter into this field. So if you are familiar enough with different mobile keyboards, then you probably know that from time to time you get an email keyboard with an @ sign or a .com. You get a number keyboard, you get a phone number keyboard, date pickers, things like that. These are really mostly meant to make mobile keyboards come up. There are some unintended consequences of using some of these things. So for example, if I say number, I can come back here and I can refresh and I can still write Debbie. Axure absolutely does not care that that's not a number, but now I've got these things. So let's say I did write a number, 7. I can go up. This is really hard to use. I can go up, though look how tiny that tappable area is. It makes me sad. Or I can go down. If it's important for you to have that number keyboard pop up and you do want to use the number input type, what I typically end up doing is creating a box that's really small. with no outline on it, and I cover over that thing. Border equals 0. I don't bother. You can make a global widget style for it, but I usually don't bother. And I just try to figure out where this needs to go to cover that thing because I don't want to see it. If I want to make some sort of up and down paradigm, I'm probably going to do that by hand, and I'm certainly going to give it a larger tappable area than that microscopic area. So typically when I am using these different field types, I am also typically creating a workaround for something weird that this thing is doing. So just be on the lookout for this as you experiment with it. These might not all be dreamy dreams. They can be a little bit weird. Now let's move on to the text area. The text area and the text field are super similar. The main difference is that the text field is meant for shorter, linear, left to right text, and the text area is meant for paragraphs. So great for comments, questions, long things you're asking people to write. You know, if it's a fake job application, maybe there's a question. What do you believe UX is? And so same kinds of things. We have our disabled style, which it's the same thing, form disabled, so you don't have to make a whole different set of styles. Hint style, same thing, but we do have a different default style, text area. So if we don't take the time to change this, I've got small text here and I've got large text here. Now, if you want that, that's fine, but you can say for my text area, I also want that to be 18 point. And we didn't do this with the other field, but remember that you can try to change things about like the border and the color, but we're going to do that in our next lesson about making these more visually designed. For now, I just want you to see what they look like if you just drag them out, do a little bit of global styling, and go for it. Oh, did I not save that? Let's double check. That is still being a grumpy. Text area. Oh, I must have forgotten to save it. Look at that. So again, that's how I troubleshoot stuff. I refresh it and I test it out. You'll see me do a lot of testing stuff. And then hopefully now we've got the larger text. And I'm not afraid to make a mistake. And then I just have to figure out where I went wrong and retrace my steps and fix it. So there you go. No points deducted for making a mistake and fixing it. Now we've got a drop list. Now again, because the drop list by default is medium fidelity, there's a lot of things here we can't change. Some people go into the style and they think, ooh, I'll be able to change this caret. I'll change it to a different icon. I'll make it bigger. That's not here. So by default, these Axure widgets are, ooh, look at me. I popped this out and I didn't mean to. How do I get it back? Remember view. We can pop it back in manually, or I can just say reset view and everything will go back to normal. So our drop list mostly looks like this. That's why I say these widgets are great for medium fidelity. We will in a later lesson talk about building a drop list completely from scratch. And yes, Axure does have things like that in their new libraries, but I want everybody to know how to make it from scratch. So we do have a drop list global widget style. We can say by default the drop list is this and the text in it is 18, but notice there isn't any place for me to say anything related to that function. So we don't have, oh, we forgot to put stuff in it. So to put stuff in it, double click. And now you can add a lot of things or you can add one thing. So let's say I add a lot of things. It'll say select one. And then it will say Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. Now the checkboxes are for which one do you want to be seen by default. So for example, if you have a list of states or provinces and you're assuming that the system is going to sniff people's IP or location and default to where it thinks they are, then maybe select one is not selected by default. Maybe one of these other ones is. I'll select Wednesday by default. And now if I refresh, you can see Wednesday is selected. Now you also saw that I didn't really have any control over these other colors. There's not a lot of drop list things going on here. I don't see any other thing that says drop list other than this. So there isn't drop list items, there isn't drop list hover states, there isn't drop list selected states. We're going to build that by hand in a later lesson when we make these completely custom and from scratch so that you can finally control the visual design of it. But again, for a medium fidelity form field, it is good enough. And again, you can resize it and affect the text, but really nothing else. Now let's take a look at Listbox. Listbox is from another era. I don't think we use these anymore, but a Listbox was when you used to have lots of things in this box. And I'm not going to bother selecting, allow multiple things to be selected by default. So let's come back to that. Do you remember when we used to have these things where there was a list and they sometimes scrolled and you had to pick one, or you could pick multiple ones? That just seems so other era to me. We don't really do that anymore. I think when people are selecting multiple things now, we tend to give them checkboxes. I don't really think that we tend to do this anymore. If for some reason you've got a legacy style system that is still using this, hey, Axure has a list box, but I don't think we use this anymore. I think we're more likely to use checkboxes and other paradigms. Let's take a look at checkboxes and radio buttons. So here is a checkbox. We can just drag it out. You can write something here if you'd like. Yes. Now, we do get a little bit of styling, but not much. So somewhere here, it should say checkbox, and I can mostly affect the font. So I can say it's a big font, and you can see it's already changing. And it looks like it's not aligning well. Let's see, what if I do this? Okay, that's a little bit better. Vertical align middle made it look a little bit better. But notice I can't control that box. So I can't style the box. I can control the padding. So I could say, the yes is a little bit close to the box. Give me 5 pixels. But notice I have really minimal control here. So again, great for medium fidelity, not great for higher or full fidelity, but we'll do that in a later lesson. There's one more thing that I wanted to add in talking about checkboxes and global widget styling. So we're not done yet. And that is that when you look at your checkbox, and I've isolated this one on a fresh page for us to talk about it, we talked about how you can mostly control the font, but you can actually also control the checkbox color. You're not going to be able to control the checkbox icon or a couple of other things about it, but we can control that checkbox color. So for example, we could say that the line around it is blue and the border thickness is, let's see, can I control this? Let's play with it. 2. There we go. Now we've got border 2 the border of 2 with the blue, and we can do even a little bit more. And we could say that when this checkbox is selected, so let's duplicate this, call it checkbox selected, and I'm going to write medium fidelity to remind myself this is one of Axure's checkboxes and not a fancy one I made myself. You could say that our fill color is, let's pick wacky color, and let's see how that looks. But of course, we have to teach Axure that that's what the selected style looks like. So we would have to go to Add Style Effect, Selected Style, Checkbox Style, and we're going to find it way down here where I said Checkbox Selected Medium Fidelity. And let's see what it looks like. So by default, it looked like that. That's not the prettiest thing in town. Let's see if we can clean that up a little bit. Widget Style Manager, checkbox selected, medium fidelity. So what if the line color were actually white? Then let's see how that would look. That would look like that. You know, we're getting there, but it's not perfect. The idea is that you could certainly work with that and play with that and adjust it for the way that you might want things to be. We can take a look at what else we can adjust here. Corner radius, no, that's probably not going to help us. Spacing, probably not going to help us. So yeah, these are some of the key things that you would be able to do with this checkbox, which is why I have the later lesson on completely visually designing your own checkbox. So here's our checkbox. And remember that in Axure's language, this is selected true and selected false. So selected true, as I like to say, it is truly selected, meaning it's been checked off. And then selected false is unselected. So that means we can take a quick look at radio buttons, and then we will try an exercise with checkboxes as a separate lesson. So again, radio button, minimal styling, mostly the font size. But let's imagine we have a yes radio button, and let's imagine we have a no radio button. All right, let's take a look at those. Refresh. Yes. No. Uh-oh, snake eyes. So in this case, we have to teach Axure that there is a relationship between these two things so that when you are selecting them, there can be only one. Who remembers the Highlander movie? Super cheesy 80s movie, and the big catchphrase from it was, there can be only one. So when there can be only one, which in this case we would only want either yes or no selected, we've got to teach Axure they are in some sort of group. Now the confusion here is Axure calls it a group, but there's also this type of group. And that's where you group the things together and they move together. This is different. This is a radio group. It lives over here in the properties, and it says props because Axure thinks they're super hip. And we can say show all if you don't see it, but you should see assign radio group. Now you just have to give it a unique name. So let's say I call these radios because I'm not feeling creative. Now I can go back and refresh, and I can say yes. And I can say no. Aha! Yes, success. There can be only one. Now be careful. If you are making a longer survey, questionnaire, form, it's really tempting to copy and paste these and use them again for another set of answers. What happens for our choices and what happens for our radio group, and there can be only one? Now in this case, we would want there to be two, there can be only ones. Maybe I say yes here, and maybe I say no here. Uh-oh, this yes became unselected. Why? Because all of these are in the same radio group, so Axure believes that there can be only one selected from these four. The way we fix that is to take whatever is in a separate group and give it a different radio group name, even if that means adding a number or something simple to it. Now we have these two as radios, and we have these two as radios too. Now we should be able to have there can be only one for each set. Yep, there you go. Success. So in general, when I am building, especially if I'm working fast or early concepts or medium fidelity, and I don't have a library of existing style guides or design systems to work from, I'm just dragging out Axure's default stuff so that I can do medium fidelity and do it quickly enough. If you want to do something more fully visually designed, more visually realistic, because these will certainly function realistically, if you want something more visually realistic, we've got to move into a later lesson about visually designed elements. But first, let's do a lesson about checkboxes.